Welcome back to Building Games on AWS. My name is Tran, and in this series, we'll show you the simplest way to integrate Amazon GameLift with Unreal Engine. In this episode, we'll go over how to test your integration locally before uploading your server build to the GameLift service. The prerequisite for this is Java Runtime Environment Minimum version 8 and the AWS CLI tool. Now, I won't be going over how to install and configure the AWS CLI tool, but there will be links in the description on how to do this. Please install and configure the AWS CLI tool prior to proceeding with this episode. GameLift Local runs a limited version of the managed GameLift service on your local machine. This enables you to test your integration prior to uploading your build to the GameLift service. Now, every time you upload your build and deploy it to a fleet can take 30 or more minutes. So ideally, we want to test our integration prior to uploading the server build to the GameLift service. To test our integration, we'll use this guide that you're seeing right now on your screen, and the link to this will also be in the description below. The section that we want to focus on will be Test a Game Server. Note that we will not be using Test a Game Server in client, since our game client will not be communicating directly with the GameLift service. If you were following along with our series, you should have downloaded a copy of GameLiftLocal.jar when you downloaded the GameLift Server SDK. So to find this file, navigate to where you stored the GameLift files. And instead of going into the GameLift SDK release as we did previously, now we'll work in the GameLift Local folder. Inside the GameLift Local folder, in the File Explorer, click on the address bar, type in CMD, and press Enter. This will open an instance of the command prompt in this directory. And the command to start GameLift Local is java-jar gameliftlocaljar -p 9080. This will start GameLift Local on port 9080. So we can copy that and paste it into our command prompt. Then in step 2, start our game server. To do this, navigate to your build folder where you package your server build from Unreal Engine. Then inside the Windows Server folder, you should see the shortcut that we made previously with the log parameter. And this is the shortcut that we want to use to start our server so we can see the logs. And you could see that when you start that server, there's already some interaction between GameLift Local and your server build. And every 60 seconds, you should also see a health check, which would return the status of healthy. In step 3, start the AWS CLI. Now this is just an instance of the command prompt. So to test the interaction between the AWS CLI and our GameLift local service, we can copy this GameLift describe session with the endpoint URL being localhost on port 9080. You can see the interaction between the AWS CLI and the GameLift Local service as you run that command. And next, we want to create a game session. So we can copy that command. Note that this command won't run when you copy it because there's a carriage return after the fleet ID flag. So we'll have to take a side step and open up Notepad or lightweight code editor of your preference. Then we have to remove that carriage return after the fleet ID flag. And now it should work. This is the response from GameLift Local, which is very similar to the actual response from the GameLift service. And finally, we want to start a game client to complete our integration testing. To do this, navigate to your project folder, open your project, and open your project in the Unreal editor by double-clicking on the Unreal Engine project file. And we can test play the game client. Here I'll test play the client in a new editor window. And once again, we'll connect to the local dedicated server using the command console. So press the tilde key, and the console command is open 127.0.0.1. If you can imagine for a minute, this is the framework of our series, the framework of our project. On the upper left-hand corner, this command prompt represents the GameLift service, this being GameLift Local. The lower left-hand corner, this will simulate the back-end service, which we will build in a later episode. This back-end service will interact directly with GameLift. In the top right-hand corner, this is our dedicated server build hosted on GameLift. The game client is your game client. After we've successfully tested our integration with GameLift Local, we're ready to proceed to upload our server build to the GameLift service. We will use this documentation as reference on how to do so. The link to this will be in the description below. Before we can upload our server build, we need to create an install script. An install script will install all the dependencies that your server build needs to run. There are two key things to make note of here. On Windows, the install script is a batch file aptly named install.bat, and it needs to reside in the root directory of your server build. Second, the root directory of your server build will be in a folder called game on the C drive. This will be important for our install script as well as later when defining the path to our server executable because we need to know what to omit from the path to the respective executables. To create our install script, we can take a look at this example for Windows. In this example, the install script will install a Visual C++ redistributable for 64. It installs it in quiet mode with no restarts, and then logs it out to a log file. To create our script, we can start by copying the snippet, open up our trusty Notepad or lightweight code editor of your choice, and we'll paste that in. So instead of installing this redistributable, we need to install the prerequisite dependencies for our UE4 server. Now, fortunately, if you package your server build with UE4, it will generate a prereq setup executable that will install all the dependencies that your server will need. Navigate to your build folder, to your server build. This is the root directory of your server build. Click on Engine, Extras, Redis, en-us, and this is the executable we need to run on the server, UE4 prereq setup underscore x64. So hold down the Shift key, right click on that file, select copy as path. Now back in our install script, we simply delete that redis.exe file and paste in the path to the UE4 prereq setup. Now remember that this install script will reside in the root build directory. So we have to delete the beginning of the path and delete the closing quotation mark. So the path to this UE4 prereq setup.exe from the server build root would be engine extras redis en-us UE4 prereq setup underscore 64.exe. And we want to install it in quiet mode with no restart. And I'll go ahead and rename the log file. Then we can proceed to save this file in the root directory of our server build, and the file will be named install.bat. So now we will navigate to the root build directory and make sure that install script is there. Next, the documentation instructs us to package our game build files, which we should have already done by packaging your UE4 server build. So the game server binaries and the dependencies is packaged when you package your UE4 server build, and the install script is what we just created. Now we can upload our server build to GameLift. There are two ways to do this. We can upload directly from our local file folder from our machine, or upload the build files to an S3 bucket and create a GameLift build from there. For this series, we will upload directly to GameLift from our local directory. And a reminder once again is that your server build root directory will be in a folder called game on your C drive in your Windows server. So to create a build from a file directory, we will need to use an AWS CLI command. And we can briefly go over the required parameters. The build root is your server build root directory. The operating system, since we package our server for Windows, we will use Windows 2012. The name of your build, a build version, and the region where you want to upload your build. So we can start by copying that AWS CLI command and open up our trusty notepad or lightweight code editor of your preference. The operating system will be Windows 2012. The build root will be the path on your local machine to your server build root directory. So navigate to your build folder, then navigate to your server build root directory. Copy that path and paste it in our command prompt line. Make sure you put that in quotation marks. The name of our build, for this I'll use GameLift-Unreal. Build version, I'll use 0.01. And for our region, we use US West 2, which is Oregon. So once you have all of the parameters for the GameLift upload build command, we can proceed to open up a command prompt, paste that in, and press enter. So uploading your build will depend on your internet connection speed as well as the size of your server build. And we can actually go to the GameLift console to see that server build being initialized. So sign into your AWS Management Console, open up GameLift. It's all the way at the bottom, lower right-hand corner. And you can see our build being initialized. Once your server build is finished uploading, head over to the GameLift console. And if we refresh this page, we should see that our build is uploaded and ready. Because from here, we want to create a fleet. I'll name this fleet GameLift-Unreal-Fleet01. For the fleet type, we will leave it as on demand. In a future series, we will talk about how to use spot instances with FlexMatch for cost optimization. But for this series, to keep everything simple, we will use on demand. For certificate type, we'll leave it as disabled. For binary type, we will select our build. Which should show here as GameLift-Unreal 0.01, which is what we named it earlier. For our instance type, we would choose the C5.large. Now that C stands for Compute Optimized 5th Generation, and large is the size of the instance. Note that this is eligible for the free tier. For location management, we'll just leave it as US West 2, the home region. And here is where we need to define the launch path to our server executable. So to get this path, navigate to your server build root. It should be in the name of your project, binaries, Win64, GameLift_UE server, which is the name of our project with the server suffix. So hold down Shift, right click, copy as path. So for this, we'll just paste that in. Get rid of that closing quotation. Now keep in mind that we need to navigate to this executable from the root of the server build. So we need to delete everything up to the GameLift_UE4, which is the name of our project. So the path to the server executable should be the name of your project, binaries, Win64, the name of your project with server as a suffix .exe. Once you have that, click this green check mark on the right. And we can leave the game session activation as default. For the Ec2 port settings, we'll open up port 7777. The default protocol for UE4 is UDP. And for the IP address range, we'll open up this port to the entire internet. And the CIDR for that is 0.0.0.0/0. Go ahead and click that check mark on the right. Then we can proceed to click on Initialize Fleet. This process can take up to 30 minutes. You can check on the progress of your fleet initialization by clicking on the Events tab. And periodically clicking on the refresh icon. After your fleet status has changed to active, we can proceed to test our GameLift server. To do this, we need to create a game session. Later on, this will be handled by the game backend service. But for now, we will test using the AWS CLI tool. So open up a command prompt. And if you recall from our GameLift Local testing, the command to create a game session is AWS GameLift create game session with the flags fleet ID And we can copy the fleet ID from the GameLift console. And if you run that, it'll tell you that you also need the flag maximum player session count. So we'll go ahead and add that in too. And we'll set that to 2. And here's the response from GameLift with the IP address and the port number. So go back to your GameLift console, click on Game Sessions, and we can see the same information. So to test this, navigate to your project folder and open up the Unreal Editor with your project. Once your project is loaded, you can go ahead and test play launching a standalone client. And we will connect to the GameLift server using the same command. The difference is now we will use the GameLift server's IP address instead of localhost. So in your standalone client, press the tilde key to open up the console command, type in open, then paste in the IP address of your GameLift server. And we are connected. Now let's do that test with multiple clients. So here's the client on my right-hand side. Open the console command, open, paste the IP address. The client on my left-hand side will do the same thing. So there we have it. 2 clients connected to a single server on GameLift. That will conclude this episode of Building Games on AWS. In the next episode, we will start building out the back-end service using AWS Lambda functions.